ultimately, that's what we want. All of us are fallible in some sense, and so how can we make sure that we have those incentives to do the right thing along the way? And I think that's what you have a great opportunity here on the Committee on Government Efficiency to look at fraud, waste, and abuse and other areas to improve and expose government inefficiency. Of course, the legislature has the power of the purse. And so when you're looking at these different inefficiencies, you want to get those moving along the way through the legislature. It's a concern I have at the federal level with how much DOGE is doing to make cuts here and there, but ultimately it's going to be up to Congress. You know, there's about 14 other states now that have some form of a DOGE, whether it be Texas and Florida and others that are out there. I think these are really good steps to be looking at how do you make the reforms necessary to really bring about this idea that spending is the ultimate burden of government and to restrain that government growth over time. One of the bills that I've looked at and we've looked at KPI is Senate Bill 99, which considers the number of government employment and how many of those government FTEs are still available, haven't been filled. That might be one of the first steps in the direction of reducing the size and scope of government where necessary, because if they haven't been filled yet, and this was up to 180 days that they've been vacant, is that position really necessary? And I think that would be a good step in the right direction. Another thing that we've been working on a lot is the responsible Kansas budget. And what this does is basically set in place a spending limit on the budget to make sure that it's limited to no more than population growth plus inflation as the maximum growth rate over time. And what that does is allows for a macro growth rate. So you can have spending on education grow by a certain amount or Medicaid or whatever else it's going to be, but that the overall amount of the budget doesn't grow by more than population growth plus inflation, which is a good measure of the average taxpayer's ability to pay for government spending along the way. And what that does then is allows for you to look and prioritize where the dollar should go. So if education is a key part of that, or school choice, or whatever the spending is going to be on, then prioritize that, but make sure that the total amount of spending doesn't grow by more than what the average taxpayer can afford, because that puts a larger burden on the productive private sector. So some things to learn from other states. One is Colorado's Taxpayer Bill of Rights. The TABOR, I think, has been kind of the gold standard, if you will, of a spending limit over time. It's based on population growth plus inflation. It limits state and local spending to that limitation. They also have a mechanism where if there is excess revenue collected, a surplus, that it will be returned through refund checks to individuals across the state. I think that should be changed to have it reduce tax rates versus giving refunds, but at least there's a mechanism in place to incentivize people to limit government spending and give extra money back to the taxpayer. Texas employs a bottom-up approach where the House proposes their budget, the Senate proposes their budget, and then they go through the sausage making, if you will, and figure out what's going to be the best path forward. And the governor does submit a budget, but it's more ceremonial. Here's the priorities of what the governor wants to do, but it's really up to the legislature to decide how those priorities are going to be set and move forward. Florida emphasizes long-term financial planning, so they look at not only what's in the budget itself for spending on different areas, but also on debt, on pension liabilities, that sort of thing, to really make sure you have a broad view of what's going on within the budget. Utah, they have efficiency audits. They also look at a one-door policy where they have combined their workforce commission along with their health and human services, those sorts of policy priorities into one building, to where if somebody needs access to any of the safety net programs, that they'll have one door to go through instead of multiple, and that helps to streamline and increase efficiency throughout the process. So some of the recommendations of looking at Kansas, what's been done elsewhere, and everything else like that, I think there's a couple of things I wanted to mention here, and then love to take some questions. The annual budget analysis, I think, would be a key part of this, to go through and even during the off time or during the interim, to really consider how these dollars are being spent. So it's not just the ks, hopefully during the session, but also during the interim, to ensure that those dollars are continually being used wisely, as they are the taxpayer dollars. Priority-based budgeting, which includes that performance-based budgeting part, along with any zero-based budgeting that could come together, would allow for more priorities to be set and make sure that within those dollars, within the budget, that the priorities are going to where the legislature wants them to go that's going to help the people of Kansas. And just a reminder, thinking about something that have those teeth, maybe a 5% cut to the agencies that don't comply with the performance-based budgeting or something along those lines. Independent efficiency audits, I think, are really important. Not only could this committee maybe look at doing efficiency audits or having state auditor's office or something like that do the audits, but I think it's also prudent to maybe have external entities look at it within the expenditures of the state, within existing resources, to look at how can we improve efficiencies along the way. And some may like it or not, but that's kind of what Elon Musk and them have been doing in DC, is looking at where are those inefficiencies taking place. Not saying that Elon Musk needs to do that here, but something along that seems to be, along those lines seems to be important. Strengthening the spending limit, I think there's a lot of improvements that can be done with the state spending limit to really rein in government spending over time and allow for more tax relief. And then long-term financial planning to ensure that you're not only looking at the budget, but the pensions and any state debt that also should be looked at. And then the last one here, kind of with my time in DC and a lot of the work that I do across many states, looking at budgets, is also to be careful about how much money you're bringing in on federal funds, especially right now when the federal government has, what, $36 trillion in national debt. They're running $2 trillion a year in deficits. Some of the first places I think they'll want to cut or be forced to cut when the crisis occurs, if we're not already there, is to look at Medicaid. Even underneath the current budget proposals, there's some discussion about reining in Medicaid expenditures. And if they do that, that would certainly influence the state's budget on how much is going to Medicaid. The other one could be on education. There's a lot of discussion about Department of Education there. So my push would be, or proposal would be, to try to reduce the dependency on federal funds as much as possible. That way you have more independence to do what you want to do as a body. So I think with all those things, if we can adopt these best practices, Kansas can move toward a more efficient, accountable, and fiscally responsible budget process to allow for Kansans to know that their money is being spent wisely. Thank you for your time, and I look forward to your questions today.
Thank you so much for the presentation. Committee, what questions do we have? Senator Thompson.
Thank you, and thank you, Vance. This is very comprehensive. I appreciate it very much. You know, I think the biggest challenge for us is that we have a 90-day session. Yeah. And, you know, how do we extend that so that if you're not on, for example, the Legislative Coordinating Commission or Council, how do we be involved with this process? And I'm particularly interested in the zero-based budgeting, you know, justifying what you're doing from point zero, not just adding on to. What are they doing in other states where they're also in limited time scope legislatures to allow all of the legislators to be involved in the process?
Yeah, thank you for those comments, sir. And I agree with you. Zero-based budgeting is a great way to do it when you're looking at starting from scratch and moving your way up. It also avoids budget inertia, where you just say, hey, here's X, and I'm going to increase it by X the next period. Well, what about all the things that were in X? Do we really need to do all those things? And so that's one of the areas where I was recommending kind of the annual budget review process, to where there is continual look at what's happening throughout the year. So you're here the 90 days, you get the budget done, but what's happening in the off time? And how can we make sure that there are checks and balances in place so that it doesn't exceed what you intend as a legislature? With any supplemental budgets and things of that nature that may be needed later on, it could be a big problem. Texas, where I happen to live near Austin, Texas, they have 140 days every 2 years. So there's a huge interim period. And the way that they do that is there's they basically have a committee that meets throughout the year. It's the Appropriations Committee. And then they review the process throughout that year and a half that they're not in session to make sure that those expenditures are being made for the things the legislature wanted and not going outside those bounds. So that's similar to what I think, and maybe even a committee like this with the COJ, I think could be, do y'all call it COJ? I thought so. So COJ, I like that. I think that could be a really big step for something like this to continue throughout the year.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Senator Shane.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Dr. Ginn, thank you for your presentation. And question I would have is, there's obviously clear constitutional functions of government, and then there's a lot of stuff that I kind of maybe put into the nice to do category. When we talk about assessing effectiveness and efficiency of a government program, what kind of objective markers have you seen utilized either on the national level or in other states, or would you potentially recommend?
Yeah, thank you, sir. Senator Shane, I think whenever you're looking at these, one of the things to go back to are what are the goals? What's the goal of this particular program? To your point, I don't think we oftentimes will have those discussions. Just put my cards on the table. I'm an ideologue, so I'm like, hey, look, here are the goals. Here's where I want to be. I'm a free market economist, and so this is where I want to go. And so I think we should be doing that with every one of these programs. And it seems tedious, and it is. Given how big government is now and all the different areas that it's covering, I think it is important to step back sometimes and think about, okay, TANF, for example, Temporary Assistance for Needy Families. The goal is to help those who are low income to be able to afford some of the necessities. And so there's some dollars there. Well, are we actually getting the efficiencies that are there? So some other reports that have looked at this has shown that only about 40% of every dollar going to TANF across many states. I don't know the specific one in Kansas. I can get that to you. But only 40 cents of every dollar actually goes to the people we're trying to help. The rest of it's going to administration, and maybe there's going to be some administrative costs, right? There's going to be some of that, but how much is too much? And when you can start streamlining some of these programs, you can reduce those inefficiencies and you can get to the goals that you're setting. And I think that also goes back to Senator Thompson's point about the zero-based budgeting. When you can start making those ideas, okay, this is really the goal of this program, and start to build up and say, okay, that makes sense. I think those would be key ways to finding out whether or not we're getting the efficiency we want from those programs and those dollars.
Yeah, thank you. As a freshman senator, that's one of the things that I've struggled with some of our programs is I hear we're spending $20 million to do X, and then they're like, oh, we've done 2 projects associated with X in 20 years. And I'm like, with a $20 million a year appropriation, I'm confused on how efficient and effective we're actually being living up to the goal of that program. So thank you for that.
Welcome.
Committee, any other questions or comments for our conferee today? Senator Thompson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. A lot of good stuff. I guess our thing is, where do we dive in? Yeah. How do you start? I think that's probably what our committee's been struggling with this year. It's a big lift to try to dive in. Do you suggest with the programs rather than the agencies? Or do we start with the agencies first and have them come before us and justify what they're doing? What have you seen work?
Yes.
Yes.
Senator Thompson, I think it's still up to grabs what works and what doesn't work. Like, that's still a question. But I think what most states do is they bring in agency heads and have them make their case for what's going on. That probably is a good way. I mean, when I was in the White House, that's what we would do at OMB. We would bring in the agency heads and we would go through line by line. Russ Vogt was the director. He's the director again now. But we would put them through a zero-based budgeting process and kind of grill them on this. I mean, that's oftentimes what you'll see is an agency head will come in and, I don't know, they'll just go through the list and then it's over. But I would like to see is more of questioning of why these are, going back to Senator Shane's point on where the priorities are and whether or not we're meeting those goals. Because ultimately, those agency heads should know the goals of their agency, probably more than many of you will. And so they can give you a better idea of where those are going. I also think it's important to have sunset reviews and not just have sunset reviews to have sunset reviews. For example, in Texas, where I also do a lot of work, we've had sunset reviews for years, but nothing is actually ever sunset. So I'm not sure how good that sunset process really is. But if you have those key checks and balances, I think it really becomes important. And then specific areas to get into, I think one of those would always be to check out your programs of handouts to businesses. Some call it corporate welfare. But I think that would be an area to look at. Where do you start? I think a lot of the programs like TANF and SNAP and some of these others where the dollars aren't going to the people that you intend, I think those are other places to start. But maybe some of those first hearings could be from the agency heads that would give you insight on how you could dig into those areas of the budget.
Yeah, I know on Department of Commerce, for example, our top 5 big programs, legislative post audit came out with a report that showed that they're not even paying for themselves. So, programs of that nature make sense to look at. Thank you.
Certainly.
Thank you, Vance. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Committee, any other questions, comments? I do find it interesting on page 2 of the policy brief you hand out, because you mentioned in your testimony about implementing responsible spending limits, which I don't know that there's much disagreement that until we can control spending, everything else kind of pales in comparison, in my words, and that there's not much of an appetite to control spending, regardless of political party. I'll just say that. And so your chart on page 2, if we did the inflation plus population growth, I think that's pretty stark telling there between the population and inflation versus what we've done and the difference there. Senator Thompson.
Yeah, and part of the problem that we're tackling is it's not so much at the state level, but we're seeing at the county and local level this massive spending and increase in valuations of property tax that's allowed them to spend pretty much unlimited. What are you seeing in other states, how they're trying to impose limits on the local jurisdictions and taxing authorities to try to help out?
Yeah, it's a great question, and Senator Thompson, I think there's a couple things to think about there. The first thing I would say is Colorado, for example, this TABOR, Taxpayer Bill of Rights, it covers state and local spending. And as Colorado has went from red to purple to blue, what we've seen is that spending has actually been under control, relatively speaking, to other states. And I think a big part of that is because of that limitation that's in place. And so one of the suggestions that I've had is that I think we should be looking at spending limits at the local level as well, not just as a state. As Chair Erickson said, I think that's really important to get to population plus inflation, but why not just have it cover the entire state and local governments? They're gonna cry about it and they're gonna get upset about it, but if they need to go above that limit, then they just need to go out to the people and explain why, and then you can have a vote on it, or there's different ways to do it. There's a 2/3 vote of the committee of the local government entity. Sometimes you can go out for a vote. It could be more costly. But then about property taxes, I think the key there are levy limits, where if you want to limit how much, or mill rates, right? What the amount is of not the rates, but the amount that's being brought in from those property taxes. I think Kansas has done a good job with looking at truth in taxation. Although I've heard recently that the House is looking at repealing some of that, or so I wouldn't want that to happen. But those are good efficiencies to shed more light on how local governments how they're spending and taxing. But add to that, try to reduce the levy limit as much as possible, ideally to 0%. If they want to raise one more dollar in revenue, then they should go out to the public, or 2%, something that gives more certainty to the public who's paying for those taxes. I think would be a really good step in the right direction. So levy limits and spending limits, I think, are really important there.
Okay, seeing nothing else, thank you so much for being here and for the information. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Okay, committee, we have 4 bills we need to work. If we get finished today, we will not meet tomorrow. That's not an encouragement to move quickly, but just a matter of fact. So, I was just made aware from the committee assistant that if you remember, last week, Nicholas Novelli shared about one of the bills, and he did submit his written testimony that is available, and so just wanted to make sure you knew we received that written testimony, and it is available. Okay, so we will start with House Bill 2101 with a quick overview from our revisor. Is that David?
Thank you, Madam Chair. House Bill 2101 would adopt a new section that prohibits a city or county from adopting an ordinance or resolution establishing a guaranteed income program that uses tax revenue unless the legislature expressly consents to such a program. Any ordinance currently in effect prior to the effective date of the bill would be declared null and void. Then also provides a definition for that guaranteed income program as a program that is not expressly required by federal law or regulation and provides individuals with regular periodic cash payments.
Thank you. Are there any amendments or questions on 2101? Seeing none, I'll entertain a motion. Senator Murphy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I make a motion that we move House Bill 2101 favorably for
We have a motion. We have a second by Senator Thompson. Any discussion on the motion? Senator Holscher.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This bill concerns me because we have a tendency to want to overstep local control at times, and this bill is one of those instances. Additionally, as was revealed during the testimony from the hearing, this isn't even an issue, so it feels like we're putting the cart before the horse, so I will not be supporting. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions, comments? Seeing none, all in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed, no.
No.
Motion carries. We will now look to House Bill 2240. I do know there is an amendment on here. Okay, we are making copies of that, so we will pass over that one for the moment and go to House Bill 2304 and a quick review of that by our revisor, David Weiss.
Thank you, Madam Chair. House Bill 2304, this is the bill on requiring certain reports from local governments concerning local economic development incentive programs. They report that information to the Secretary of Commerce, and the Secretary be required to post such information on a database maintained by the Secretary. And then it provides some definitions for what those local government incentive programs would be. And then also what the web page or website would have to do in terms of searchability and reporting. And then it provides a timeline for when those local government reports would have to be provided to the Secretary for that website.
Thank you. Are there amendments or questions? Senator Thomas, then Senator Holscher.
Yes, Madam Chair, I did have an amendment.
Senator Thomas, do you wish to explain or have the revisor?
And David can correct me if I'm wrong. This just buttons up some language in Section J on page 2, and then also extends the 30 days of execution of an economic development plan being reported to locals to 45 days. This was some direct feedback I got from the city of Overland Park, and they requested this amendment. And with that, I'll also let David explain a little bit as well.
David?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, I believe Senator Thomas explained it pretty well. They had the amendment there is on page 2 as part of that definition for the local government-based incentive development programs. There in J, it's just kind of clarifying that these are any other economic development incentive that's offered by the local government accepted by the recipient, including those listed there in the balloon. And then the strike of 30 days, insert 45 for for the timeline for that information to be reported on page 4.
Questions on the amendment? Seeing none, would you like to move your amendment?
Well, that was boring, but yes, I'll move my amendment.
We have a motion seconded by Senator Thompson. Any other questions or comments? Seeing none, all in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. Motion carries. We are back on the bill, I believe. Is that all you had, Senator Thomas? Yes. Senator Holscher.
Thank you. David, could you remind me, I don't think there was a fiscal note on this bill, or was there?
I'm sure I believe there was a fiscal note. I'd have to pull that up real quick. I'm sure I don't think there's been an updated fiscal note. There was one on the bill as introduced that had a fiscal note of $389,000, but I'm not sure how the House amendments would have affected that. So,
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and so that would be the state fiscal note, and obviously we don't know what the impact would be locally. So that's my concern overall with the bill in terms of, is that the right move for efficiencies? So thank you.
Senator Thompson.
Yeah, I do know, the Department of Commerce, we've been asking them in legislative post audit to get that website up to where we can find this sort of data. It's very difficult right now if you want to see what a local or county government is doing with regard to some of these TIFs and IRBs and everything else. It's really hard to dig in, and that website, I know they've been in the process of updating, but it's something we've been asking them to do so that we can get an arm around, how much we're subsidizing, not only state, but also county and municipal stuff. So I think the transparency is great to the extent that this is going to help, and anyone who's in local level who has questions about what kind of money is being handed out to companies for economic development. I think this is a good bill, even with the fiscal note. So I'll be supportive of it. In fact, I don't know if anybody wants to make I would make a motion to pass out House Bill 2304 as amended if there's no other amendments.
We have a motion. Do we have a second? Seconded by Senator Thomas. Further discussion? Senator Thomas.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Looking at the fiscal note, as we talked about earlier, like Senate Bill 99, talk about FTEs. In the fiscal note, it states the Department of Commerce is requesting 2 FTEs at a cost of $189,000. So a bulk of that cost would be requested FTEs. So my question would be, do they have current FTEs that they could use and reallocate so they don't need those funds? So that's certainly a conversation we could have, which would cut the fiscal note basically in half, possibly down to 0. So just some food for thought there. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Any other questions or concerns? Seeing none, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. Motion carries. We will go back to, I believe, House Bill 2240 if we're ready. And we will start with just a quick review of the contents of this bill by our advisor, David Weiss.
Thank you, Madam Chair. House Bill 2240 will require legislative approval of any Medicaid state plan amendment, demonstration, or waiver that expands coverage or would increase costs to the state. This would be a new section of law prohibiting state agencies from seeking or implementing any of those Medicaid state plans, amendments, demonstrations, or waivers. Unless the legislature expressly consents to such action, the provision of the section will not affect any state plan amendment or waiver currently being implemented prior to July 1, 2025. the Welfare Reform Committee did amend 2240 to require that legislative approval for any changes to funding structures, day services, target case management services for persons with intellectual developmental disabilities. And then also add a language allowing for the LCC, the Legislative Coordinating Council, to authorize any of those Medicaid changes when the legislature is not in session.
Thank you for that review. And committee, I'm sure this sounds familiar because we had a similar bill on the Senate side, Senate Bill 161. So I will make a motion to remove the contents of House Bill 2240 and insert the contents of Senate Bill 161, and then we'll open it up for further amendments and discussion. So that's my motion. Do I have a second? Seconded by Senator Alley. Any discussion on that motion? Seeing none, all in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. Okay, we will now, that motion passes. So I do have an amendment on the substitute for House Bill 2240, and if David would please pass that out. So I'll give a little rationale for this and then turn it over to technical or legal questions to David. But if you recall during testimony committee, there was concern about if an agency needed to make a change and, the legislature wasn't in session, and how would that work with the LCC? So this language is in response to that concern. So what it does, it says that the agency has to make a request, a formal request to the LCC, and the LCC must respond within 14 days. So it's just trying to give some certainty to agencies and the LCC around the time frame of how to deal with those requests. And so, David, did I miss anything? If you want to clarify any further.
Madam Chair, yeah, I think you covered most of it. Yeah, it's just then LCC may approve the waiver, and again, this was any public assistance program as well was in 161, not just Medicaid. Or they could designate a standing committee or special committee to review an agency's request and make recommendations to the LCC, and then upon that official notification and receipt of that, the LCC or the designated standing committee does have to meet within 14 calendar days to consider and take action on the request.
So I'll go ahead and move my amendment. Do we have a second? Seconded by Senator Murphy. Discussion on the amendment. Senator Holscher.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I do appreciate the amendment in the respect that it tries to kind of shore up some of the process there and adds that time frame. Although I still have overall concerns with the bill in terms of adding inefficiencies and just impeding the state's ability to respond to potential crises. So like I said, the meaning of the bill still overall has some concerns. So like I said, I do appreciate the amendment, but won't be supporting the bill. Thank you.
Committee, any other questions or concerns? Seeing none, all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. Motion carries. Any other amendments or discussion? If seeing none, I'll entertain a motion to pass as amended. Senator Murphy.
Okay, we'll get this straight here. Substitute for House Bill 2240. As amended, I move for passage favorably.
We have a motion. Do we have a second? Seconded by Senator Shane. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. Motion passes. We are down to our last one, committee. We may make this. Senate Bill 281. We will have a quick overview by our reviser. I see Tamara pulling the microphone. Tamara Lawrence.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So currently, state law provides for the Low-Income Family Post-Secondary Savings Accounts Incentive Program, also known as the Kids Matching Grant Program. Senate Bill 281 would replace that program with the Kansas Post-Secondary Education Savings Account and Kansas Able Savings Account Grant Incentive Program to provide a grant of up to $100 to participants who have a Kansas-sponsored 529 account or ABLE account.
Thank you. In committee, I have been informed that since our hearing, the stakeholders came together, and we do have a compromise that I would like the committee to consider. If, Tamara, you would pass that out. And I will have Tamara walk this through, and so please let us know if you have questions. Tamara?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So what you have in front of you is a proposed substitute for Senate Bill 281. And this would replace the contents of 281, and it would keep the kids matching grant program. But if you look kind of starting at the bottom of page 2 and going on to page 3, it would essentially limit the program to calendar years 25, 26, and 27. It would reduce the number of applications total from 1,200 to 1,000. And then at the top of page 3, it says the treasurer would not accept nor approve applications for the program in calendar 2028 and every calendar year thereafter. So this would essentially put a 3-year sunset on the program. And then if you look on page 4, there's a lot of new blue text there. This has to do with the audits for withdrawals. Currently, they are required to audit all withdrawals. This would limit it to 10. And I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Okay, committee, I know that's a lot. Are there questions, initial reactions? Senator Holscher.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Tamara, I'm sorry, what did you say on that last part with the audit?
Yes, so thank you. Current statute requires the treasurer to ensure that all withdrawals of matching funds are used for qualified withdrawals. What this would do is it would limit that to 10 withdrawals of matching funds, and all that blue text just provides the requirements for those audits.
Okay, can you help me understand the practical implications of that?
So instead of auditing every single withdrawal made under the program, the treasurer would only be required to audit 10 of the withdrawals.
Committee, I am going to ask Tom Tracy from the Treasurer's Office to step forward because looking at just the language may not get to the implications of how this impacts the program and what that looks like for people who are taking advantage of this. So I'm going to let him kind of walk through the changes and what that program will now look like to give us some, hopefully some understanding of what this does. Mr. Tracy.
So Tamara's correct. It's a 3-year sunset. So after 2027, we would be done with the program. For those 3 years, we would do random audits, and that would come with penalties if you if it's a non-qualified withdrawal there. So we haven't determined quite when we would do that, whether it be monthly or so forth, but it's at least 10. We could do more. So the hope is, just like a traditional 529 account, the threat of an audit would keep you on track. And we do see with our withdrawals, 99% of them are just mistakes or misunderstandings. So we don't see a concern there. And with the threat of an audit, we do think we do think that would suffice. And it does lower the participation from 1,200 to 1,000. We have never filled up the program. I reached out to Scott Gates, the former director of the 529 plan. He says the most they've ever come with was around 1,000. And that's when they did they paid for a statewide mailer. They worked with the Department of Revenue to mail every household that was income eligible. And we've never gone over that. So on average, we have 708 applicants the last 5 years. So we've never filled up the program. So I don't think there'll be a concern there. I do want to point out, and Chairwoman, you should have gotten emails from Sarah Hartweir. Interhab has sent an email. They are supportive of these changes. They do view this a positive move because this will free up our time to go out and promote ABLE, go out and promote 529s. We are spending over 850 man-hours on this program, just checking receipts. This eliminates all that. And then Nick Novelli is now, we worked with him. He is now supportive of these changes. So everyone's now a proponent. I think this is a good compromise. Any other questions?
Okay, so committee, hopefully that helped everyone kind of understand this substitute. So are there any other questions? Seeing none, thank you. And I will entertain a motion to pass out the substitute for Senate Bill 281. Senator Murphy.
Oh, thank you, Chairwoman. So I move that we pass the substitute for Senate Bill 281.
Hold on. I'm sorry, just a moment. Oh, yes, I'm so sorry. We must adopt this. Thank you very much.
So we'll change that. I move that we adopt this substitute for Senate Bill 281.
There we go. We have a motion. Do we have a second? Seconded by Senator Shane. Any discussion? All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. Motion passes. Now we will move to pass it out.
Okay. Now I move to pass the substitute for Senate Bill 281 favorably for passage as amended.
Any questions or discussion? Seeing none, seconded by Senator Thomas. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. Motion carries. Boy, dangle out a day of not meeting, and we can really get some work done. So, committee, before we adjourn today, I do want to take this opportunity to thank our staff. What a tremendous job they do every day in responding, and the workload that they carry is tremendous. And so I do want to acknowledge them and thank them for all their hard work. So let's give them a round of applause. And I want to thank all of you for all of your work in getting this committee up and off the ground. I appreciate it, and we will not meet tomorrow. With that, we are adjourned.